So second speeches are always a toss up. They are never, you don't have like one format or one line that I can give you that you should just follow this and you'll improve in second speeches. Second speeches always require an insane amounts of flexibility, and that is something that like all good second speakers will tell you. I'm going to explain a bit more on this as I go through this PPT, but I would really implore all of you to ask me any questions as and when you get them, and don't wait at the end of the workshop to ask me questions. So if you have a question, just like unmute yourself, put in the chat, raise your hand, whatever works, so that you can clarify on the go. Right, cool. So second speeches in BP, and this is the commonalities between deputy and whip speeches, like both of the second speeches in top and bottom half. There are a lot of things that are common. Here are a few things that I've mentioned on the top of my head that I couldn't think of. The first is that there are three main tasks every second speaker has, which is to respond, to rebuild, and to weigh off. I'm going to get into the a little bit more on the technical side of what responding, rebuilding, and weighing off is later in this presentation. But just to ensure that people don't fall into the trap of saying that deputy speeches are very different from whip speeches in BP. It's not. It's mostly the same thing. uh, you would find more commonalities than differences. Of course, there are certain differences which do come or like do are shown more in like say the advanced kind of debates that you'll do, or at higher levels of debating. But for the very core understanding of what second speeches are, the commonalities are just way more than the kind of differences that exist. So yeah, first three main tasks: respond, rebuild, and way off. Second is that prioritization is key, and this is prioritization in your speeches. This means how much time you allocate to certain things within your speech. So you might give like 2 minutes to rebuttal, 5 minutes to responses, like 4 minutes responses, and 1 minute to weighing off. You can do those kind of responses, and they keep on shifting throughout the debate and how the the room has been. This will not be consistent throughout the tournament. This will not be consistent throughout even two debates that you will do consecutively, which means that you have to learn how to prioritize things within your speeches, and you have to ensure that you're not spending a lot of speaking time on just one thing or the other. It's important to take everything into account. It's important to respond, rebuild, as well as weigh off. So don't just restrict yourself to responding or to rebuilding or just to weighing off. That is not going to work. So it's important to prioritize. How you prioritize or what you prioritize, there is like a rough structure that I've given at the end of this presentation to help you, some like give you a starting platform on what to prioritize when. But in case that's something that you cannot apply directly in your next like second speech that you're going to give, it doesn't matter, because those things are something that you learn over time, knowing when to stop responding and when to start rebuilding. But the key thing here is, beyond prioritization, is to force yourself to stick to the prioritization that you decided before your speech began, right? So when you are listening to the other person speak, the speaker before you, you mostly have your speech in your head in a way, right? You know exactly how much respond, what have I have to respond to, what I have to rebuild, or what I have to weigh off. The problem is when you're speaking, and this is where people get thrown off a lot. They tend to misjudge the time that they have been allocated, which is 7 minutes, and they tend to just go off track in most cases, and they tend to spend more time doing one thing that they had initially planned to do, that particular thing. So it's important to force yourself to stick to those timestamps. If you're saying that you're going to rebut for 2 minutes, then just rebut for 2 minutes. As soon as the clock hits two, you should stop doing it, and you should force yourself to learn that particular tactic. Because once you do that and once you perfect that particular craft, it's going to be very easy for you to prioritize and to actually like deliver an efficient speech, and not just a speech that's repetitive of your first speakers. Because more often than not, second speakers, at least at a very novice level, or just like a novice to a bit mid-tier level, tend to be quite repetitive of their first speakers, and end up that's why they end up usually like getting even lesser speaks, if you notice, in than your first speakers, because your first speakers have done all the work and you're just rehashing everything. But I think it's important to like prioritize, because when you learn the skill of prioritization, you will see over time that the second speakers actually end up getting more speaks than their first, because second speakers are just much more efficient. So efficiency is the reason why they get more speaker scores at a very high level in debating. Then third is a mixed flexibility or strength. I just explained this like um, in a nutshell. The flexibility is just to, like I said, to learn when to stop responding and what to respond to and what not to respond to. Those things are something that will come in handy as you start giving more second speeches. Fourth is that always be more charitable and engagement, because your first speaker will not be. Your first speaker will always tend to dump more matter, give more rigorous analysis. They'll tend to do the mechanistic, rigorous stuff or the heavy like work of like just placing the extension, placing the case, characterization, all those kind of things. Which means that you have to be the one who does the engagement much more than what they do, and you have to take responsibility of it. What this means is that you can't just like give one or two burden pushes and say that that's engagement, because that's not. So you have to be charitable engagement. You have to buy that the other team has perhaps made the claim in a way that you have not tracked them, right? So this means that sometimes you often tend to like get lost in your own speech, like note some people write their own speeches, or you get lost in your just writing down additional arguments or whatever in your notes. You tend to miss what the other side is trying to say or the other side says, which means you tend to not take their case at the charitable best, or like you probably have not tracked them good enough. So what this means is that in order for your engagement to be proper, in order for your engagement to actually land, you have to be extremely charitable, even if you have tracked the other side, and even if they have given you basically zero to no mechanisms of or any burdens of proof is something like most burdens of proof are something that they have missed. It's completely okay. You have to take their best version, assume that they have fulfilled all the burdens, assume that they have done all the legwork that's required, and then try to engage with that best case. And second speeches are uniquely positioned to do this, obviously because you come second, which means that you have time to deal with these kind of even scenarios, as opposed to your first speakers that are going to run their case based on what your prep time was. So flexibility and being charitable engagement is something that's going to uh, something going to really help you a lot. Fifth is communicate, because the problem is that and communication is not just in prep time, it's also like during the kind of the round that you have. Why do I say this? Is because your first speaker does not need a lot of communication. Your first speaker knows their job, right? Because 15 minutes of prep time, that's all you have to spend like deciding, right, what your first speaker should do. Because if it's PM speech, you know exactly what they're going to run. If it's a member speech, they'll tell you with what they're about to run, but you don't have like that line of communication with them, because they are literally an impervious. Because if you try to communicate a lot with them, you try to tell them a lot of things, they will get confused, and you don't want that as second speaker. So you mostly just pay people second speaker, you just play it a little safe. You just allow them to do their bit, and then you try to figure out what you have to do. Which means that communication with your first speaker is essential for you to take input from them and not for you to give input to them, right? So it's important to take as much input from them as possible. Perhaps there are things that they felt their speech was lacking. Perhaps they noticed something, like say a particular piece of engagement that the other side had to your case that you didn't notice. And that's why it's very important to start communicating with them as soon as the debate becomes, and communicate heavily with them and not just restricted to prep time and what you have decided. Because the prep time strategies keep on evolving. What this means is that as closing teams, you cannot stick to your prep time always, right? Like your opening might just tough burn you. The debate could pan out in completely different ways than what you expected it to be. You expect the debate to be on a particular stakeholder, the debate has gone to a completely different angle, which means that you have to now spend more time weighing off, which you earlier did not predict. Because perhaps you were just thinking to stay on clash, but now the clash is completely different. What this means is that at second speeches, specifically at back half, the debate evolves a lot, and you have to take constant input from your stream teammate. And that's why this communication towards you and not like something that you do towards your first speaker, right? Sixth is tracking. I think the best strategy to learn how to track is to actually start judging. And it's very counterintuitive because I'm giving like a workshop on second speeches, but judging really helps you become a better debater. I've learned this the hard way. I hate judging personally, but I judged a lot, and that really helped me a lot, especially in second speeches, because judging helps you see gaps that your first speakers are not. They probably will not be able to see. And specifically while you're whipping, you exactly know what the judge is going to remember as the dying words, the last words of the debate, right? So because those obviously there's a recency bias. That doesn't mean that the call is going to go to like closing teams, but like the recency bias at least ensures that the last impression the judge has of the debate is the whip speech, right? So as a judge, you know exactly what's about to happen, and that means when you're speaking, you can position yourself in the place of the judge, and then see what will impact them the most. What is the one thing that's striking them? What's the one burden that's missing in this case? What's the one impact that they're crediting much more? So judging really helps you, and it really helps your tracking. It also helps you deliver a better whip speech specifically, but I think it also helps you just in second speech as a whole, because there are often burdens that your first speaker skips out on that you have to fulfill. So judging is great. Try judging. And even in tracking, I would recommend, and this is a very common mistake most people make, is that they feel tracking is just noting down everything, right? Like some form of uh, I don't know, legal aid who's just writing down everything that the boss is saying. That's not really how tracking works. Tracking means this active listening. This is the active listening component of tracking is much more important than you noting down everything on your sheet of paper. And this is also a problem that you'll see with a lot of novice panelists. Like they end up writing stuff first for the first 1 hour of debate, and the last 2 3 minutes they tend to decipher everything and tend to figure out who's winning over what. But as a whip speaker, as a panelist, as a judge, it doesn't matter. Tracking does not mean writing down stuff. It means active listening. Most people will write down some stuff, like they will write down half the stuff, and half the stuff they'll listen and remember because the other half is just intuitive to them. But people who develop a very strong intuition over time, or who can remember things like without writing them down, you'll see that the tracking notes are quite minimal. So you will see them writing down only 2 sentences for the entire OG or entire OO. And they will still be able to recite you the exact case what the side is trying to explain. Yes, perhaps they'll miss out on certain examples, certain keywords the team is saying, but they'll give you exactly what the other side was trying to convey. And at the end of the day, debating, especially when there are 4 teams in the room, is about that one line or that one core idea that sticks with the judge. Yes, nuances help. Yes, they might break like very very close clashes, but you will not often face debates that are extremely close, which have to go to those kind of nuances, or whether there was this impact that had two mechanisms, or whether this one mechanism was stronger than the other. Those kind of things really do come in only and only if the room is either too novice, where no one knows what they're doing, or it's too high level where everyone knows what they're doing. In the middle, like of the bell curve, you will not find rooms that are that close. Either you know that 1 or 2 teams are going to win this room, or they're like, well, there's one team who's obviously a fourth, right? So you will have those kind of rooms a lot more than those top tier rooms or those dead bottom noise rooms, right? Which means that tracking means in this context would imply that you always figure out the core idea and like try to use that to defeat the other team, or like beat that particular idea, as opposed to trying to beat everything that they're trying to say. And that's why tracking and active listening really helps you, because it makes you realize what is fluff and what's actually meat. So that's something that you will learn as when you judge, but also as when you give more second speeches. um, and the last thing that people ask me in second speeches is how to improve as a second speaker. My advice to them always is to try going first. And again, it's very counterintuitive, but when you go first, you will realize the limitations of the first speaker. You will realize they have to stick to certain things that you discuss in prep time. You will realize that there's a degree to which they can complete an argument. Perhaps they can't impact everything. Perhaps they can't weigh off everything. Perhaps they can't make those preemptions to the other side's case. And that is something, if you understand and recognize, will you be able to do this as second speaker? Because now this is exactly where you'll step in, right? If they're not able to preempt, you'll preempt for them. If they don't engage, you'll be able to engage with them. If they miss out on impacting, you will be impacting for them. So it's important to like not just place yourself in second speaker positions when you're learning second speakers. I like in the sixth point I explained that how you should start judging. Now explaining how you should start going first speakers. All this is just for you to realize that second speakers do not have a fixed role in the debate. They are extremely flexible, and to truly master all sides of the second speaker like craft, you have to actually understand all of the other roles that are present within the round. What this means is that going first really helps you to build cases. In Asian parliamentary, if this was a session about that, I would say that you should also try going third if you want to improve the second speakers, because that will help you realize the limitations of the second speaker, and also the third speaker, on how much they can engage and what do they actually build on, for you to start covering those things in second speech. So again, very counterintuitive, but it really helps you. So practice as your first speaker, go first, at least in your mocks or a tournament that you don't really care about. If you have if a certain goal in mind, maybe you have an ABP in mind, perhaps like a couple of tournaments, 6 or 7 months before ABP, you can go first. See how it plays out for you. I'm not saying that you should switch roles, but what I'm saying is you'll understand exactly what the first speaker's limitations are, and then you can start building on that as second speakers, knowing exactly what your first speaker can do and cannot do. Which means you'll also be able to push your first speaker to do exactly what you expect them to do, and that expectation is important because it also, like I said, helps in communication during the debate and after the debate. Cool. I have any questions on this before we move to the next slide? Okay, I'm assuming that. All right,
Yeah, I
different.
have a
Yes,
doubt.
yes.
So you had written about that the speaker too should always engage with even ifs. So what do you actually mean by even ifs?
So even if are just taking the other side at their best, what this means is that you say even if what the other side is saying is true, we are still winning because of this. So the even if here just implies that what so you will say x, they'll say y, right? Obviously this might be clashing at sometimes, this might be x not at sometimes, but it can also be parallel at sometimes. So whatever the other side's claim is, you take the best version of it and use the words even if to say that even if what they say is correct and what they say is true, our case still beats their case because of xyz reasons. What this does is that this does not only, so the first line of engagement obviously will be that what they're saying is not true, right? That will be your first attempt at engagement. But often, more often than not, this will not be as effective because judges, while judging, and this is again something that you'll realize when you're judging, often tend to take a middle ground between those two like opposite claims. So if someone says the world is deeply religious, and the other team says that no, the world is actually turning to like not being as religious because no one has time to follow religion, then judges are likely to find a middle ground between these two frames, and they basically end up saying that okay, perhaps some people are religious, but some people also don't have time. Neither of those framings are completely 100% true, so I'm going to take a reasonable middle ground. And this is where the analysis or the resolution of the clash will now happen in that middle ground, because teams tend to run very opposite and very like extreme radical frames. And by radical I don't mean radical left or right. By radical I mean very uncharitable or very absolutionist like sort of frames where they say that the entire world is conservative, which is not true. And the other side will say no, the entire world is actually has a liberal way, which is also not true. So the regional middle ground is something that the clashes are usually judged on. And at that moment, the judges are trying to resolve your clashes. They will look for the team that has been more charitable to the middle ground, and not to just their own side or to their own extreme frame. And this is where even ifs become very important, because if you are saying even if the world is not as conservative, if you're running the world is conservative, the other side says no, you say even if it is not true, even the world is liberal, our case still works or our impact still stand because of xyz reasons. When you do that, you have shown the judge that in the middle ground as well, you are willing to engage, and the middle ground you're also winning, and you're not just winning on your side of the frame. And that is where judges are able to give credit to you for the clash resolution, as opposed to the other team who has just run their case on their extreme frame. And that's why even if it's important, it's just the term you use, but the theory behind it is just to explain the middle ground between the two like counterclaims. All right, cool. Then differences between, yes, go ahead. I think someone's unmuted.
Yeah, I have a simple question that
Mhm.
when you are asking us to go as a first speaker to understand what the second speaker can do or should do you
Mhm.
actually mean that participate in some tournaments or some rounds as first speaker and then go as a second speaker in others, like something like this?
No, so this is not for a particular tournament. This is just to for you to understand the expectations. You could do this in a tournament. You could do all 5 rounds in a tournament. You could do all 8 rounds or like go till finals as a first speaker. You could practice this in your prep spars. You could practice it against your internal sock mocks, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It is just to understand the theory or the mentality of the first speaker. It is not something that you have to practice necessarily in a tournament only. You can practice it anywhere you want. I was just like saying tournaments usually are better to have this kind of practice because it puts you under the pressure of performing better, which a spa does not do. So perhaps you can use this in a tournament, maybe round 1 and 2 and 3 you could do, and perhaps you can switch back on round 4 and 5 to your more comfortable roles. But you can practice anywhere essentially. Okay, cool. Then differences between deputy and whip. These are just like burden fulfillment differences and not really differences in the way you approach the speech a lot. But as a deputy, you have to remember a few things. The first is impacting. More often than not, impacts usually come at the end of the argument. And what this means is that your first speaker is going to spend a lot of time giving mechs, examples, framing, characterization, all those kind of things. But they'll usually skip out on impacting because it comes dead at the end, right? Sometimes they tend to impact in the last 15 seconds of their speech or the last 30 seconds of their speech, which is usually not enough, because the impact is not just like just mentioning that then this will happen. That's not just an impact. The impact is to explain when this happens, what happens then, and why is it important, or just illustrate the degree to which the impact really occurs, or why this argument or this mechanism creates a tipping point of the impact. So the impact is not just like mentioning that our stakeholders are benefited. It's a whole bunch of other micro burdens that you take when you're impacting, and that means impacting needs time. and more often than not your first speaker will miss out because they just don't have 7 minutes. They don't have like a lot of ground to cover in 7 minutes. Oh, sorry, they have a lot of ground to cover and they won't be able to cover it in 7 minutes. So impacting something that you should usually start with, specifically if you're trying to rebuild the case or trying to extend on your, or like just try to fulfill the burden that your first speaker skipped out on. Second is extend, which is like completely coming up with a completely new argument. So the way I recommend this to speakers who are just developing right now is that you should try to go for an inch wide but mile deep sort of theory when it comes to case building. What this means is that don't run four arguments, run one argument but run it to death. Like run everything about it, run all the level of analysis that you need, run your while loops, run your what, how, when, what next, all those kind of things, questions that you ask when you're running an analysis of a particular argument. Do that completely. If you do that completely, if you're at a very beginner level or like a sort of mid-tier level in debating, then you will be able to exhaust elements of a speaking time. What this means is that if your first speaker is giving one argument, they'll be able to complete all of the parts of that argument in 7 minutes and nothing more than that, because like I said, they're mid-tier, right? A very experienced debater might be able to do this in 4 minutes, but that's the sufficiency to build over time. So what this means is like second speech has a lot of like leeway to go ahead and come up with this completely new argument, and you can go ahead and start doing those kind of things like turf burning your back half so that they don't extend over you. There's certain ideas that you feel are can be winning, you just try to just cover them up or touch up upon them so that your closing does not go and extend on you. So as deputy, you should extend. What this means that don't just rehash everything that your first speaker said. Try to come up with completely something that is new and meaningfully different from your first speaker. Personally, I never like to repeat anything my first speaker has said unless until it's absolutely necessary. Perhaps their speech was a little bit convoluted and perhaps it was not as clear. Perhaps that I feel that people did not understand, or maybe I could see judge's expression and they were like making a face when the others when my first speaker was giving something, giving some random mech or whatever. And perhaps that's important. Perhaps then only then in that case I tend to repeat it to make it more clear sometimes, or add certain elements to it to make it more palatable. But more often than not, I prefer to just not repeat anything that my first speaker has said. Try to run a completely new line. But this does not mean that it has to be completely opposite to what your first speaker has said, right? It has to draw on from that. What this means that they have set the ground for you, and you have to like start running on that ground. That doesn't mean you create a completely new ground. You just make them irrelevant. Sometimes that does happen, and you don't want to do that because then basically you're running two different cases in the same like bench, and that's quite confusing for the judge to like basically figure out what the core essence of your case is. So try to be like like at least be on tangent with what they have said, be tangentially relevant, if not completely relevant, but try to always extend, come up with new impacts, come up with different stakeholders, come up with new mechanisms, come up with like a different frame. Maybe they've talked about how religion impacts politics, for example, and you start impacting how religion impacts like like civil society as a whole. So there's a different lens, but at the same, it has like very overlapping sort of elements to it. So it's important to extend, but like don't extend for the sake of extending, and don't extend for the like don't extend to make your first figure irrelevant. Extend for the just for the necessity of adding a backup to your to your case. What this means is that, or a safety net to your case, because if the first argument fails and you have spent 7 minutes repeating the first argument just like with better English or better sentences than your first speaker, then perhaps if that argument fails in some way, then you basically are fourth, or you basically just get dead in the debate. So that's why it's important to extend meaningfully, to at least ensure that you have a safety net, perhaps a different pathway to victory to balance out the risk that your first argument is going to take. That's why extension is important. Third is preemption. As a deputy, you have to preempt. This is not just preemption in terms of what the other side will engage with. So if you're a DPM, you know that the DLOs usually have a free lunch because they basically can just run a completely new frame and box OG out of the debate completely. So you have to preempt a lot of the engagement that comes from your DLO, but also from your just long cross, which is closing opposition. You have to deal with those kind of preemptions. You have to think what are the kind of extensions that they can run, what are the kind of like rebuttals they'll have to our case. So making yourself watertight or airtight to those kind of things, like trying to say that, oh, if DLO says this is a response, like a preemptive response to what they're about to say. Even if they don't say it, at least it shows to the judge that you are well prepared on your own case. So that's one preemption. The other preemption is also your own closing, right? If you know that there are certain ideas that your closing can run, and you feel that you can like perhaps not run it completely because you don't have time. At least ensure that you're touching up upon it. At least ensure that you have mentioned it. At least ensure that you have done the framing and the impact, if not the mech. It's still, that's still mostly decent, because then whatever your second speech is, like your closing says, they might or might may not be like derivative, and that's usually just great as openings, because you can make your closing derivative if you and basically push yourself to think what your closings are thinking about. Lastly, as deputies, you should ensure the arguments gets completed. Do not rehash. Like some people, like I said earlier as well, and I'm repeating this because it's actually very crucial. Uh, at, like I said, the mid tier or the novice level, people tend to just repeat a lot of their first speakers line by line, and they just, like I said, use better language. And that's obvious because you have like 14 minutes of extra time to think about your speech, as opposed to your first speaker if you're DPM, for example. But that does not mean that you just keep on repeating what they have said, because it doesn't add anything meaningful to the debate. And most judges will like dox your scores if you're just trying to repeat, which means that your job is to complete the argument. Maybe they have missed out, like on, like I said, impacting. You tend to impact. If they have missed out on a particular mechanism, you give that mechanism, or you give the bunch of mechanism that they missed out on. That should be your goal. Your goal should be to complete the argument, inch wide, mile deep. That mentality, you have to complete the argument and not just rehash everything that they said in a better language. That should not be your goal. That's This is specifically for deputies. Then as VIPs, you should always remember to resolve deadlocks. Now, some debates might not have deadlocks. Some debates might just like be completely like on clash. There might be a resolution to the clash already um, on top half, and you don't basically need to do anything. But that's okay. Not all debates will have deadlocks, and I think people just learn the word deadlock and they tend to use it everywhere, especially at VIPs when they say that top half is in a deadlock when it's really not. So don't just go for that debate jargon, but rather try to actually figure out if there's deadlock. And if there's none, like I said, move on. Then second is that go house by house. I recommend this
Excuse
very
me.
highly. Um, Sorry, someone has a question. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to clarify what deadlock actually means. Like, I'm very confused between clash and deadlock.
So like clash is basically when both sides have equally persuasive claims, but also are like you there is like a lot of back and forth on one thing, which is the same framing, right? For example, if both teams agree that the religions are conservative, and you have both teams competing that their claims matter more within this frame, then this becomes a clash. But if there are teams that, if one team says that that the world is very conservative, other team says that the world is not as conservative, then this becomes a deadlock, because now neither teams are actually winning, which means that like no level of sophisticated analysis will take one side over the other if they don't resolve this first. The clash cannot be resolved if the deadlock is not resolved. So deadlocks is usually happens on frames. Clashes are usually happening on things like impacts and what stakeholders are more important or what mechanisms are stronger. They like you can use them interchangeably at times, but usually the way this works in deadlocks is that as back half you say, okay, I'm going to resolve a deadlock on top half. Maybe some people are religious, some people are not, and exactly what you think of the middle grounds, right? Those are the ways to resolve deadlocks when you think of middle grounds between those two arguments. So in parallel debates, deadlocks happen much more often. In debates that are not as parallel, you will have many more clashes that you have to resolve. Okay, then like I said, go house by house as VIP. This is very important, specifically in rooms that you are very unsure of, because the debates can be quite messy. And yes, like there are, like I said, a lot of debates are going to happen when debates will become very messy, specifically if you're closing, because your very decent opening will eat up the stock matter that you can think of, right? So you have to place the extension very carefully. Your member has done like a good job or whatever, but it's on you now whether the case becomes derivative or whether you take a first, or at least you win over your opening. And the only way to do that is to actually go house by house. Sometimes you have to dish the strategy. Let me be very clear about this, that sometimes you have to just explain why your framing matters more than the other side's framing, or your clash that you try to run in maybe say in back half matters more than the top half clash. Sometimes you don't have to do it go house by house, but in messy debates you definitely do. The reason for this is that judges are also equally as confused, because they don't know who's taking a first and fourth. And that's why, like, as VIPs you have a lot more control in the debate, because there's literally if you're gov VIP, there's like one off VIP after you. If you're off flip, there's no one after you. So you basically control a lot of the way the debate is going to now pan out in terms of ranking of who takes a first. So what this means is that if you go house by house, if you say that OG is losing because A, B, C, D, E, these are the two burdens, two rebuttals, whatever. So if you say OG is losing, judges are at least clear that CO is beating OG. Similarly, you can do CG then, and you can say CG's derivative when they say this. So you do CG as well, and then you go opening up. For example, the reason why we beat O is because we give you like whatever the impact, which is greater in scale, or we target a more one level stakeholder, or whatever you're weighing way up against your opening is, like you can just use that, employ that. But if you go house by house, the judges know exactly where to place your bench against those all houses. And that's why going house by house is great. It really helps you go from like fourth to a first as well sometimes. But this can be a very ineffective strategy, specifically if the clashes are quite similar. What this means that everyone's debating the same clash, all 14 are debating the same clash. Then there's no really point of going OG and CG, because OG and CG have given just different mechs of the same idea, right? So it doesn't really help you that in that case. Perhaps the only way to do that it will be to like either rebuild or like try to position extension vis-a-vis at least your opening, and then try to beat out gov bench as a whole. Then you don't have to go OG and CG separately. But in messy debates, you have to go house by house, and that's something that again you have to perfect within a particular time limit. You have to say that okay, for 4 minutes I'm going to go house by house, I'm going to beat all houses. Then for last 3 minutes I'm going to position my extension, I'm going to give you more impacts of my case, and that's basically it. So again, if you do this in a timed format, that going house by house does not mean you spend 7 minutes just beating three houses and you have not actually explained why you've won the debate, right? Like beating other people and winning the debate are totally like separate things. They might sound like on the same length, but sometimes it's not. Like you can beat three houses, but if judges doesn't feel that you're beating, then if you're not explaining why you're winning, they'll not make you win the debate. So going house by house is great. Then lastly, give the debates roadmap to the judge. Meta commentary. I think I mentioned this earlier as well. You are the last word in the debate, essentially, in a way. You are the reply speakers in AP, if you want to do an analogy. So what this means is the judges are going to remember everything that you say much more clearly than they're able to much more clear than what like your first speaker, the PM and LO have said, right? Because it's been an hour since they have heard the PM and LO. So your impact is very important. There you have a recency bias, tap into it and try to persuade the judge of why this call should be this way, and exactly give them basically an OA on how they should basically be judging the debate, right? So in the last 2 minutes you can just say, and like I know people do this a lot, right? For 5 minutes you can just like do your debate land stuff. You can get into it, get into the nuances, do the like the heavy lifting, dirty work, all those kind of things. The last 2 minutes people tend to just zoom out. They're like, judge, the way you judge this debate. And this is the moment where the judge sees, okay, now I have to follow this very closely, because whatever comes after this is going to basically impact my rankings as a consequence. Those are the 2 minutes or the 1 minute that you do when you zoom out as a whip, completely zoom out of all the mechanisms, all the nuances and the battles that have gone on in the round. You completely zoom out, you give those 1 minute of meta commentary or 2 minutes of meta commentary. In that moment the debate flips completely, and most great whips are able to do this, especially for closing. That's why people tend to prefer closing when it comes to actually winning in rounds. Out rounds have a total different game sometimes, because judges just don't note a lot, considering don't have a lot of accountability there. But that's completely different. That's like just debate mental psychological games. But most people tend to prefer closing, not because I know that it's again sounds a bit counterintuitive if you are a novice speaker, because you're like, I can't find extensions, so what's the point of going closing? But as closing, you control the way the rankings work out. You can manipulate, you can strawman the other side's case. You can show that okay, this is what their case was, but it actually was completely different. You can just like manipulate their speeches, and they will be like left sitting with their heads in their hands and saying like what happened here. So as whips, you have a lot of control in the debate, and you should weaponize that control by giving the meta commentary to the judges. Last 1 2 minutes are exceptionally important. They become your reply speeches, like I said in APs. Okay, rebuilding, response, rebuttal, and weighing off. Three things that I mentioned in the beginning. So these are just like a few brush ups on what rebuilding means or how you should approach it. Rebuilding is first listen to your first speaker carefully, track them like a judge would. Track the missing burdens that they have, that they have in your speech. Track the impacts that they are missing out. Track like whatever framings that are uncertain or unproven or assertive in their case. So you have to track them, listen to them properly, but also track them in a very strong manner. Second is, like I said, ask your first speaker, which is the communication angle that we talked about earlier. Third is listen to the concrete responses on the other side. So if you're DPM, LO will respond to PM, obviously. So you can't just spend most of your time from on the LO speech just writing down your case or talking to your first speaker. This has to be like a very striking balance between those things. And like trust me, even after 6 years of debating, I've not found that balance on should I listen to my first speaker or should I listen more to LO? Because if I listen to my first speaker, I'll miss out on what LO is saying. But if I listen to LO too much, then I won't be able to get my first speaker's analysis of what the debate is going or how the debate is panning out or what they missed out on. So you have to like basically balance. You have to have like basically have two lines of like audio here, and you have to balance those things out while your own thoughts are also churning in the head. And that's why second speakers are quite like it's a quite tricky spot to be in, and it takes a long time to perfect this. I would say no one's perfect in this, but like it's a long time that you'll take to at least be a like a decently good second speaker. It takes much lesser time to be a decently good first speaker, or um, yeah, just like a just basically a first speaker, right? So then that means that listening to counter responses is also important, and trying to rebut them, trying to rebuild your case from those responses. Like if they are giving you a very damaging rebuttal, you use that rebuttal, you flip that rebuttal, and then you try to rebuild your case from that rebuttal, because the judge is going to remember that rebuttal, and they should also remember the response you had directly to that rebuttal. And not just like rebuild in isolation. Don't just say that. Uh, don't just not pay heed to the other side's response and just start rebuilding whatever you want to rebuild. Because if the response is quite strong, then it doesn't matter if you rebuild in like 100 different ways. If the response is already like perhaps maybe framing it out completely. So you have to bring it back to the frame or to explain why the frame is relevant, and that's where second speeches become also important when it comes to listening to the other side's case. Obviously, because you have to engage, but also you have to rebuild. Then lastly is reading the room. This is like a little bit tough in online. Obviously, like because you can't see facial expressions, but more often than not, and this is again some, I don't know, debating dark arts if you can think of. Sometimes you just look at the judge and you look at their expressions when certain people are saying certain things. Most judges will give it away. They will basically like just give you exactly whether you're winning or losing. And if they do like something like, oh, they are impressed, then perhaps that's something to respond to definitely. And if they just make us like a stupid face, then perhaps something that you should also disregard when you're responding or rebuilding, right? So those kind of things, something that you have to read. There are a lot of things that your back half will say here on, and that's something that you also have to track. Perhaps those are things that they are about to cover, and you don't have it in your case, which means that a deputy you have to certainly change, and you have to take those things that they said like a here on, and you start to like put that in your speech so that you turf burn them. Similarly, you have to listen to the POIs the other side has to, like say if you are DPM, the POI that CG asked to say LO, you should track that POI, because that might just give you an indication of what CG's case is going to be. And you can just take that POI, incorporate that POI, put it in your speech, make like some case about it, perhaps just give the framing and the impact. At least ensure that your back half is not able to extend using that POI. You should try to figure out those, like I said, psychological dark arts that happens in debate rooms, specifically when you're reading people's faces and the kind of reactions that are coming in the room. And those things really help you in knowing exactly what to rebuild and what not to rebuild. um okay, sorry, this structure slide in the middle is like the order is wrong. I'm going to come back to this. Yes,
I
someone.
I just had a doubt.
Yeah.
Yes. So one major issue that me and my teammate have. So my teammate and I are struck. Our way of going about things is pretty simple in opening, which is she puts like all the matter in first, and I go and impact and weigh and whatever in second. But all of this only works in novice or like intermediate rooms, because we've seen in high level rooms the closing just comes and talks about something very niche and they end up winning. But it's usually always prerequisite to our case, but usually I just don't really care about it being prerequisite if it's like weighed out better. So should we change this strategy? Because if we take like the most intuitive thing in opening, the closing has an upper hand, because then they can just go ahead and take a heavier burden or weigh more and fill in loops and gaps. So I just want a little clarity on how we should go about in opening.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, this is a very tricky thing in BP debating, right? Like, you feel that you will be able to turf burn enough because your closings are always afraid that they will not have enough to extend on. But if you're going opening, then you also feel at constant threat because you don't know what your closing is thinking. Perhaps there's something completely genius that you have not thought of. So In those cases there's not a lot you can do. If they have a completely different angle to the debate, like if it's a motion about economics and they start talking about politics, for some reason they talk about internal stability of a country based on economics, that's something that you can't really predict, and it's impossible to win against those things, specifically if the closing team executes it like to perfection. In that case you are just sitting there and you like I said, you can't do anything. You perhaps the best you can do is ask strategic POIs to your to CEO, trying to explain why CG is irrelevant. People tend to do that in POIs, but really doesn't help because the POI just gets dismissed. But what I would recommend is that uh, try to force, like I said, as second speaker, you should force yourself to see the debate from a different angle. Try to see whenever we talk about like extension as a second speaker's deputies, right? In that instance, you have to see your first speaker obviously as a part of your team, but also someone that you're extending on. Which means that it can't be OG versus CG. It has to be PM versus DPM versus CG. So you don't have to win over your first speaker, but you have to just stop before the point you end up beating your PM, right? So you're making them irrelevant. But anything before that is allowed. Anything before that is rather encouraged. Like you should try to force yourself to think of those different lines. Yes, your closings will try to um, basically run like some whack stuff, or maybe they do some high burdens and they try to fulfill it. But as a judge, it's the burden that you place on a completely like hail mary extension is also quite high. As a judge, you will not just buy something because it sounds fancy. As a judge, you'll also care about whether they have fulfilled those higher degrees of burden. Yes, a very strong closing can do it, but in most intermediate rooms that you mentioned, you will not face this. They will take that burden, but they'll not fulfill it. So you have to trust the judge in that process. And but this comes with like obviously a caveat that your intuition or your stock argument they're trying to run at OG is complete. Like there should be no gaps to that, right? If you leave gaps out of this, then your CG will not try to run that whack stuff. They will just try to run like a vertical on you. They'll try to fill in analytical gaps in your case and then try to win over you with their own case because that's the most intuitive case that the judge will remember. And at that point you have to like I said, the mentality has to be inch wide mile deep. You have to cover everything, and if you're missing everything, missing anything, and your CG is able to extend on you on burden fulfillment, that's something that you have to completely work on. That is your fault in the round. Then it's not CG being brilliant. That's your mistake of like you did not do enough. So that should be a learning curve from that. Like if you're not able to complete even the stock arguments are easy to remember. Yes, they're easy to dismiss off also sometimes, but like I said, the burden the judge places on a back extension is also quite high. So I would not say change strategy, but I would definitely recommend completing your arguments to death. And I mean it when I say it. Like it should not just be like full analysis and just reaching the impact after that. It has to be everything. It has to be tipping points, it has to be comparatives, it has to be even ifs, it has to like do you have to do mitigation, you have to do flipping, you have to do everything. It has to like basically encapsulate everything that an argument can possibly have, and not just like this A happens and B happens, that's why C happens. That can't be an argument, right? That is quite assertive. There are a lot of gaps in between. Take those micro burdens, give those better examples, give the contextualization, explain why your framing is also true and your argument is also true and impact is also true. So analysis on all three levels. Those are things that you have to really care about when it comes to fulfilling your burdens. Does that help?
Fair enough. Yes, just one small follow-up on this then.
Yeah.
For example, one team does all of this in opening. Can you simply just by impacting and weighing in closing by some miracle take over them? Because it has happened in some cases, but is that like a good strategy to go about in closing, or do you should you necessarily get at least one or two extensions?
So in a case where opening has done everything, the first strategy should be to avoid a fourth. What this means is that you try to at least beat out the other two benches, even if the responses are derivative. You have to obviously add new stuff to those responses, because I'm assuming if your opening has done everything to death in a stock argument, they perhaps have left some bits of charitable engagement. They perhaps have left some bit of comparative engagement. Perhaps they have not weighed their case enough. You can't win over them just by adding weight to their case, because then you're just whipping them, right? You're not whipping your own self or your own case. But what you can do is if you add weighing and you explain why this argument or this impact that opening has talked about matters more than the impact that the other two teams have talked about on the other side, then at least you ensure a second. Beat them out. That should be your first goal if you feel that you are completely dead in the water. Take a second first, and then you should go for things like a hail mary. And this is also very round dependent, I would say. it really depends on what position you are in the tournament, or what is an in round or an out round. In an out round where it's like a quarters or a semis, you don't want to take the start. You don't want to go for an hail mary, because you just want to take a second. You want to go through the next round. In a finals, you would definitely do it. I think everywhere but a final, you should definitely do. You should never take like a hail mary case. You should never be like completely different tense, like insanely high burdens. Let's prove how the world changes. You should never do that. Especially never in rounds, and never in those in rounds where it's not like a complete, like when it's not a bubble, right? When it's like round 3 or 4, or like round 2. Never take those Hail Mary cases, because the judges are not like right now attuned to the idea of judging highly like nuanced cases that are coming about. Obviously, they are starting out. They're also like, everyone just starts out a bit slow in the first, second couple of rounds. Maybe around 3, 4 onwards, they start to like actually be a little more attentive to things. But the problem is those Hail Mary cases, if they don't work, they give you a fourth, and you take nothing from the round. You take 0 points, and that really hurts your break chances. So never go for the Hail Mary case in rounds. Perhaps in out rounds you can try, but only it's dependent on what kind of out round it is. In finals, like I said, yes, but not in any out round where two teams are proceeding. So yeah, that's that.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, but like, I would also say engagement is actually an extension. So if you don't have impacts, and you can't just win with impacts and weighing, because like I said, you're just impacting them. Extension rebuttal can actually win you the debate a lot more than you can imagine. Like, there are a lot of teams that don't do even ifs, and even ifs are a great way to win. You can just say we are much more charitable than our opening. So yeah, you can focus on engagement, if not anything else. Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Sorry, just one last question. I'm very sorry.
No worries.
So if, for example, you you're closing, and I've noticed when I edge, I'm able to identify loops, etc. In debates, I think it's psychological. I'm unable to find loops in opening, especially when they're good. So are there like certain ways in which you have like certain rules where, oh, you have to fulfill all of this, and then you know that they've fulfilled their burden, and as closing you can identify if they haven't.
Okay, so for this, like, there is no like a solution like step that I can give you. But what I personally do, and this is obviously after 6 years of debating, I can do this now. I don't actually write arguments that a team is giving when I'm judging, or when I'm doing a deputy speech. I don't write down what they have said. I rather write down the burden that they have skipped in whatever they've tried to say. So I know what they tend to run. I know the crux of their case, but I'll write down like 5 burdens that they've skipped out on at least. I know this is the word, and when they fulfill that burden, I cross it out. Like, I'll be charitable to them. I'll not just like be like, oh, they have not done this, even when they have done it. But I will write down the burdens that they're skipping out on every sentence they take, right? Every sentence they make. Maybe their frame is assertive. I'll write it down. Why true? I'll write it down in brackets, on at least on my sheets, and this is how I track. I try to write down the burdens, and that's where I try to enter the debate through, especially if I'm running a vertical. So as judges, it's easy to identify this, obviously, because you are a little you're not biased to any side or any particular bench. But as speakers, you have to recognize that you'll always be biased towards your case. You'll always feel that your case is the right case, and you always feel that you're winning the round. It's a good mentality to have, but it's an unrealistic mentality to have, because that like puts you in a sort of echo chamber with your own teammate, where you're just talking, where you just feel that you're winning the round, or you're winning every round. In that instance, it's like I said, it's important to listen actively and not just track. What this means is that you actually write down every bird that the other team is that your opening is missing out on, or the other team are missing out on. Think like a judge. I know it's difficult, but if you write down burdens, then it's quite easy. Because if you're thinking like a judge, when you're after tracking and then trying to make sense of what the case is, then it's going to be quite difficult, because the case will as a whole will not make a lot of sense to you. That means burdens are an easy way to find exact technical gaps in the other side's case, without really pushing yourself to analyze the other case completely, or without really trying to break a clash or like resolve a clash. Because those things are something that judges can afford to do, but a speaker cannot do, like I said, because they are biased. So writing down burdens is an easy identification, and that will help you at least do some bit of what a judge does, and not, if not completely, make yourself push yourself out and think like a judge when you are giving a second speech. So burden identification should be very strong for your own case, but also the other side's case. That is the way I would do it, at least at an intermediate level.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Rebuttal. Rebuttals, a lot of ways to rebuttal. There are a lot of workshops also. I would recommend you watch those workshops because they are like 1.5 or 2 hours long as a concept. But just like a very quick rundown, three things you should always do in rebuttals. In this is more true for BPs, like surely helps in APs as well. But in APs usually have these things fulfilled because they are like whatever 25 minutes of speaking time. But yeah, in BPs, it really teams really miss out on these things a lot. One is comparative, because if it's a regrets motion, the team will just give you like a bunch of harms. Why should I regret this thing? Without giving you a comparative. It's a THO motion, they'll also not give you a comparative. Sometimes they don't explain. Maybe in a THPTX should do Y motion, they don't explain how they saw reach solution as opening opposition. Closing opposition can just say that this is how we solve the problem. So the comparative is something that all teams miss out on, not just the opposite side, but also like opposing benches, or but also your own opening. Which means questioning the comparative really helps you figure out extension material as well as engagement material with the other side. Question the comparative always. Second is mismatch and problem solution. Or like a gap in problem solution. This is great for VIPs because the VIPs can basically, like I said, strawman or manipulate a particular team's case to sound like something else even when they meant something else. And this is, like I said, a very dark art in debating. Like it works sometimes, it does not work sometimes. But you can just say that is a problem solution mismatch. This is a problem that they decided to solve. We have a different problem that you want to solve. Our problem is much smaller. Our problem is much certain. Whatever your weighing metric is, like you can just explain why the that problem is not solved. There's a different problem that you can solve with the same solution, policy, mechanism, narrative, whatever it is. So at VIPs, you can really change that particular angle of problem solution. Lastly, question the tipping points. In BPs, again, specifically in BPs, people tend to miss out tipping points uh, very often because the mentality at least at opening is to turf burn, right? It's to ensure that you're covering everything. Your closing should have nothing. But often, more often than not, you'll miss out tipping points, and your closing will be like, sure, whatever OG is saying is right, but here are three reasons why the tipping point, why this mechanism leads to this impact specifically, or why this policy leads to this impact specifically. And you might have done all the legwork. You might have given the policy how it works, you've given the problem of what the issue is, you've given solution, you have also explained why the or what the impacts of this are, or why it's important that we should care about those impacts. But if you don't do the tipping point, then you're not joining those two gaps together, right? You're not joining problem with the statement, you're not marrying those two things together. And this is where CG can just extend and say that, tipping point is not there, so we're going to prove tipping point and basically win the debate after that, because they've claimed everything you have said. So that's how extensions work on verticals, and that's why it's important to question things at tipping point. Not just, like I said, all these three things are not just for the other side; it's also for your own self. You should also know if you are being comparative, if you have a tipping point, if you have a mismatch in your problem statement. Those things are something that you should care about as well when you're building your case or when you're in prep time, at least. Yeah, someone has a question. Okay, assuming not. Then there are steps to rebuttal. There are three steps that I like to follow when it comes to rebuttal. Uh, I have a full different workshop on this as well, but like just to rehash it very quickly. The first is mitigation, second is flipping, third is trading off or like weighing off between clashes of stakeholders. Mitigation is just like reducing the size of the other side's impact. It does not eradicate it; it just reduces it in size or in strength or intensity or vulnerability, whatever. Second is flipping, saying that whatever they are claiming actually happens much more on our side. If they're claiming a benefit, that happens much more. The first step was to say that the benefit does not happen a lot, but even if this happens, it happens much more on our side. So it's different strategy than mitigation, which is flipping. But the third strategy is that even if it doesn't happen on our side, even if it just happens on their side in the best extent that they talk about, why we are still winning, that's trading off, right? So three steps to a rebuttal. Try to follow all three steps. All three steps might not always work. Sometimes mitigation works, but in most debates you will see that mitigation is not working. Judges will also give you feedback that you're just mitigating, you're not actually you're not rebutting, which is also a problem because rebuttal means things like the harder stuff that you do, the more difficult stuff, which is the flipping and the trading off. Those are things that are actually tougher to do. But it doesn't mean that you should not try to mitigate. You should throw the kitchen sink at every argument, I would say, and try to see what sticks. So yes, try to do all three steps of rebuttal. If you have questions about this, like let's push it to the end, because this is something that requires a bit more theory. But like you should recognize when you're mitigating, when you're flipping, and when you're trading off. Try to follow all three steps for every argument. All right. Lastly, weighing then. So weighing has different metrics. You might have heard of these metrics across your debating whatever journey. Then you have scale, vulnerability, certainty, intensity, additional context, tipping point, all those things. It's not just weighing, like I said, against your against the other side. When you're not just weighing against, your opening, or your sorry, your short diagonal or your back half, for example. It's also weighing against your opening. So there are two parts to weighing, specifically when it comes to BP. Yes, the manual does not says that explicitly you don't have to explicitly weigh anymore, but trust me, all judges care about it. All judges consider it. All judges will give you credit for it. And if you're not weighing, they'll also punish you for it. So the manual doesn't say it, but it's like a norm that no one like dares break. So you should follow weighing. You should always weigh against your opening. Always weigh against other teams. You can use a bunch of ways to do it. This is just impact based weighing. There's also responsive weighing. There's also comparative weighing. There's also like things like obligation. Those kind of things also kick in. Those are a little bit advanced, but these are things that are quite readily used by a lot of intermediate debaters when they say we have expanding this on scale, we are using a more vulnerable stakeholder, whatever. So those are things, right? Coming back to this slide that I missed placed in the middle. So on structures, on structure of your speech, and I also, like I said, I have a slide which shows some of breakdown on what you should do. So on structure of second speeches, this is true for both speeches, deputies and whips. Read the room. Always start with what you think is the most important thing in the debate. Sometimes your member speech or your first speech, this is especially true for members, but also happens for first, like for PM and LO as well, that sometimes they don't just place the extension well or the material well. Sometimes you feel that, like maza nahi aaya, like it's not that great. Perhaps they could have done something in a different way. Perhaps they could have said this thing at that point, and perhaps that would have made a lot more sense. In those instances, it's important to place the extension before you start with anything else. Before you start the house bias comparison, or the comparison between clashes, or trying to push someone out, whatever, or rebuttal, first try to place the extension. This is specifically true, like I said, for closings, because in closing sometimes you have to take Hail Mary cases that we were discussing earlier. Sometimes you have to take a completely new lens or completely different angle to the debate that none of the teams have talked about up until now, and suddenly you are starting a completely new angle that judge also did not predict that you will do. And now you have to place the extension in the round, because if you don't do that, you are basically fourth, because there are three teams that are talking about one particular thing. Maybe they're talking about how to help the poor people, and you start talking about how social policy should change or international relations can change as a consequence of this move. Then you are completely introducing a new frame, new stakeholder, angle, perspective, what I want to call it, lens. Then all those things, they need to be placed first. Even if your member has done a great job, you still have to place it first, because the degree of whackness that it has is also can be quite high. The more degree of whackness, the most time you have to spend on it to prove that it's not actually that whack. It's something that's quite realistic, that it should credit you for it. So placing the extension matters a lot, specifically when you're running a new angle. But this is also true when you're not running a new angle. What this means is that when you're running things like verticals, if your member has given like a speech on explaining why your opening missed out on the tipping point and you are fulfilling that tipping point, then instead of repeating every mechanism that a member has said, you just say that we gave you mechanisms on why the tipping point of this argument is proved. Opening government missed out on this tipping point because they gave you A and B. They don't tell you why A leads to B. This is what we have done. This is why we win over opening. Convincingly give the judge reasons for why you're winning over opening by placing the extension first. So placing the extension is a crucial thing for whips, irrespective of whether the extension is whack, irrespective of whether it's horizontal or is it vertical. Doesn't matter. You have to place the extension, because placing the extension directly beats out your opening. That is at least fourth avoided. So that's something that's important. Then it's whether it's rebutting a strong claim that from the other side, or being the material. So perhaps you are DPM and the LO has given a very strong, compelling claim on why your case does not make a lot of sense, or why you're losing the debate. And then it becomes very important for you to rebut that strong claim first and then try to rebuild. At this point, you'll not place the case first, because the placement of the case will not really matter. The case itself is irrelevant, right? And that means you have to first beat out the idea that's making it irrelevant before you try to place the case in the debate. And that's why sometimes you don't place the extension. You first rebut the strong claim or the other side's claim, or you like rebut the rebuttal, whatever. You have to like basically dial it down, at least to ensure that you have a shot in the round. Lastly, it can also look like weighing the material against the other side. If you know you are quite comfortably winning, if you know that your opening has not done anything, and you are quite comfortably winning, at least after your member speech anyway, you don't have to place the extension anymore, then you can just explain why the other side stakeholder or other side's clash does not matter. And this is why you start with the way off. Then you can just say that we beat OG and CG, because like if you're VIP, if you're op VIP, for example, you say we beat OG and CG because of why our stakeholder is much more on scale or vulnerability or whatever kind of weighing you have in the debate, the trade-off, the weighing that you have in the debate. Use that at the beginning of your speech. Beat the other two teams, ensure a second, then you can easily take a first by also explaining why you're winning or opening that the member has already done, right? In a way. So that is how you start your speech with. That's the important bit you start your speech with. Don't just start your speech with like I said, don't have a fixed structure on how you start your speech. It is adapting to every round that you do, every mock that you will do, a tournament that you do. No two debates will be the exact same ever, which means that you have to be quite flexible in how you start your speech with, because what the things that like I know I said that whips are the last line or the last they have a last word in the debate, but more often than not, judges also tend to place very high burdens on whips because they like we're not going to buy a complete whip dump, which means the first 2 minutes of your speech can be strategically used to add certain things that you feel your first speaker has not done enough, right? And or perhaps the more important bit, something that you should pack into the first 2 minutes to ensure the judges like remember this much more. So what I like to do personally is I pack the important bits in the first 2 minutes, and I tend to bring it back in the last 30 seconds because I want the judge to like just have that flavor lingering on in their head after the debate is over, to like to remember that okay, this is something that they have spent time on also, but it's also something that they wanted to push. So in both those, like in the first and last bits, I try to make the judge remember those important things. And that's why reading the room is very important for you as a speaker. You should know exactly who's winning over what, so you can then know what to prioritize in the debate. Second is avoid a fourth, then third, then so on until unless the room is quite clear. If the room is quite clear, if you are like a intermediate debater and there's a bunch of novices, then you don't really need to do this. But avoiding a fourth is the most important thing. That is the single biggest strategy that everyone should follow, irrespective of what level of debating they do, irrespective of what tournament they do. I think it's even more important if you go to majors. Always avoid a fourth. The fourth is nothing. It helps you. It does not. It's a round wasted. So always avoid a fourth, and that's the job of a whip speech also specifically. Um, Deputies can also do it by explaining why the argument will make sense in the end of the debate or whatever. They can weigh it, place it, everything. But whips specifically have a lot of control, like I said. So as whip speakers, you should avoid a fourth. That should be your first goal. And after that, you can just do everything that you like. You can add new elements, you can rebuild, rehash, like you can weigh off, it doesn't matter. But avoiding a fourth should be your goal. All your steps that you take in your speech for 7 minutes, 7 minutes 15 seconds should be to avoid a fourth, then third. If you know that you're avoiding a fourth, then go for a third. It's to build your way up, right? Don't just start going for the first. That never really helps, because if it doesn't land, then you are fourth. So don't go for a gamble. Play like a safer game. Then use good examples and tactics of persuasion. The heavy lifting is always done with your first, because your first speakers are going to do a bunch of mechanisms, a bunch of arguments, a bunch of impacts. The speeches can get, like I said, quite confusing. What this means is that your job is to bring clarity to the debate. Like, and going second speaker has actually helped me a lot with my clarity in speeches. Even if I go first or third now, it doesn't really matter, because I have learned that you have to ensure the material sticks much more than what the material is. The material is decided by your first speaker. Your 15 minutes of prep time, the first speaker will regurgitate, they will throw everything out there. But it's on you to ensure that the material is winning. And that is different from just throwing the material at it, right? So you are like the glue between the material and the judge, and you have to ensure that your clarity is there, which means that it's on you to come up with good examples. It's on you to use tactics of persuasion, probably pace your speech, probably like use different tonalities, whatever, use rhetoric, use humor, use anger, whatever works for you. But it's your job to ensure that you're doing all the stuff that we talked about up until now, through this PPT, but also ensure that you are using good tactics of persuasion and using good examples. So like I said, with a second speaker job is quite tough because it's always on the fly. It's never really like stagnant or concrete or a monolith. You have to keep on changing and ever adapting. Uh, but these are things that you should never forget. So this is something that you should still like hold as core mentality pieces when you're going and like approaching a second speech. Cool. This is something that I made for AP. This might not be completely relevant, but like I think it still makes some sense in my head. I just copy pasted the screenshot from that PPT. So yeah, when you're dealing with a matter heavy, obviously this keeps on changing, right? And I've written down exactly the kind of LO that happens, what that requires you to do. If it's a matter heavy LO, And usually, if they run a parallel case, then you don't want to run the same case as your PM, because if you run the same case, then the debate becomes parallel and becomes a deadlock, and there's no resolving it. So it's a toss up between you and opening opposition. Then it's important to engage. Then it means that you have to take their claim, explain why the parallelism is not true, or break down the parallelism. Then try to explain why your framing makes more sense than them, or even if their framing stands, why you're still in the debate. Which means there's the beginning, the first part of his speech is actually just 2-3 minutes of just targeted engagement with the other side, especially if they run parallel cases. The second part you can just spend on extension material. You can do things like weighing, you can do things like preemption, or just trying to turf burn, all those kind of things. But you have to first engage with the other side if they're running a parallel case. If you don't break the parallelism, then you are dead, and then you're not done a good job basically. Then second kind of LOs you will see is that they engage a lot because they don't have good ideas of their own. They wasted prep time, so they're just going to engage everything that you say, or maybe just they're too smart and they know exactly what you're trying to do, and they're on clash with you with every angle that they throw at you. So maybe they're just too heavy on engagement, and in that instance, like you should, and they're doing something like rebuttals, or they're trying to say that it happens on both sides and that's why PM is irrelevant. Then 3 minutes you should just explain why it's not symmetric, why there's a tipping point that happens, why that means you have to rebuild a lot more, and then you do things like engagement or preemption or weighing, right? So if you notice that the first half, if it's a matter heavy LO, it should is more engagement heavy. But if it's a engagement heavy LO, then it's more rebuilding, which means that you have to be flexible between the two. You can't just start with engagement always. You can't just start with rebuilding always. It really depends on the room. You have to be, like I said, on your toes all the time. Then most LOs you'll see actually do half and half of each, which is like the most strategic way to do LOs. So they'll engage with some material, but they'll also throw out a bunch of material. And in that case, it's like I said, then it's completely a toss up. Then it's on you to decide as a judge at DPM to I like to ascertain whether LO is winning over PM. That should be your goal. If you think LO is winning over PM, then you have to spend more time beating out LO so that at least your PM wins over LO. But if you think the LO is not winning over PM, then you can have a lot of time to rebuild, and you can just deprioritize engagement to a bit, because if your PM is already winning over the LO. So the judging tactic or judging like sort of skill really kicks in here when LO is decent, half decent. When they're decent and they're done half and half of both. So then you take a zoomed out view of the engagement, look at the strongest rebuttal, identify flip clashes. 4 minutes for 4 minutes, you should just do extraneous engagement after you take the zoomed out view, and then you can do things like preemption only if it's required sometimes, because if they have not done like a great case in terms of engagement, then you have a lot of time to just turf burn because you don't have a lot to deal with. But if they have done a good job at engagement, you have to first deal with engagement. So this is just like I said, this is more specific for APs, because you have a whip speech as well that you rely a lot on. But this can also true at least for top half. You can basically prioritize what you should know. This was not to give you like a exact timestamps on what to follow. Like this is just this is not even a recommendation. This is just my experience on how I like to do this. But everyone has their own way of approaching second speeches, so don't try to just emulate or copy. That really doesn't help you. You have to change. You have to be extremely flexible. The point of the slide was to ensure that the point comes across, which is that flexibility is key, and flexibility is the only thing you should rely on as second speeches. You have to be completely adaptive. You cannot rely on a fixed structure of speech that a first speaker can possibly rely on. Yeah, that's all for this PPT. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free. This is your time. Um, yes, go ahead. Yes, go on first. You're saying something. I cannot hear you, unfortunately. So, no, you're not audible to me. Um,
Now
yep, yep, you're audible. Yeah, yeah.
amazing. So I'm a PM whip, and my teammate and I have been flipping to. I'm thinking of flipping roles in top half. So I completely get the whole PM in order to understand deputy things. So I now know what kind of deputy I want to be. But since also a whip, I find it pretty difficult to weigh both implicitly and explicitly in top half, because at least in whip I'm able to meta weigh, like comparatively proving why we fill some burdens or something like that. You get it, right? So but in top half, the element of preemption plus the idea that I can reframe the debate because of DLO offloading affects my mentality when I'm trying to weigh in top half. So, any tips on how to get through it?
So I actually did not understand the question that well. You say you're able to do meta commentary, but your issue is with weighing especially against top half.
No, my issue is weighing when I am in top half as a deputy.
Oh, so if you're DPM, for
Yeah,
example.
exactly. So I'm currently a PM whip, but when I go from deputy to whip, I know
Yeah.
how I will want to whip,
Okay.
whip and weigh. But when I'm trying to weigh in deputy, I find it a bit like difficult. Granted, I have a like a like a frame of reference of how I usually weigh in bottom half. I
Understood.
bring that whole thing to top half, and it's a bit messy. So any way how to
Yeah.
get
So
over
I
it?
think at deputies, especially at DPM, you have an easier way to actually weigh. The reason is that there is like you said that there is no other frame of reference the other team has, right? So like there's no different stakeholders. Maybe your closing has not brought in a different angle, and you are basically weighing against nothing right now.
Mhm.
But it's actually helpful for you because what you can do is you can force a burden on them. You can push them to defend that burden, and sometimes like it's strategic to do this as well because you can just say that the other side is going to claim maybe some other stakeholder or maybe XYZ argument. This is why our argument preemptively makes more sense or should be weighed above their argument. You give your weighing metrics, whatever. This forces them to one defend that argument, but also give like counter weighing and then also explain why their weighing makes more sense than your weighing, which is also things like which is like tied to meta commentary and like a bit advanced debating sort of stuff. So that's a burden that you push on them, which means that it's a disadvantage because you don't have a frame of reference, but it's also quite an advantage because you can build that frame of reference for the other team. So it's the skill here is to just learn how to weaponize it. And I would say that like sometimes it also helps in prep time to think of what the other side is trying to like basically think of what the other side is trying to prep or will be prepping. So the way I like to do this is like first 5 7 8 minutes of prep time if we are OG, we prep our case, and obviously this depends on your team chemistry with your teammate. If you have like the same wavelength, if you're prepped for a long time together, whatever, you know exactly what the other guy is thinking, other
Mhm.
person's thinking. So your prep time will be quite efficient. Like for 8 minutes, you'll be able to prep everything that you need to prep. The last 5 7 minutes, you just think of the other side. कि अच्छा वो क्या चलाएंगे, like let's think of what they can do, and then you think of the best thing that they can think of or the best thing argument stronger argument that they can think of, and then try to preemptively put all those elements in your speech, try to either like rebuild through that, or even if they have not come up with this material right now, even if they're not come with the engagement right now, you can assume that they might, because there's something that's also quite intuitive. You don't have to think a lot, right? Sometimes the cases are quite intuitive. All debates have two sides. So obviously, you as a debater, if you were given opening up, you would also think of the other side as anyway.
Mm.
So what this means is that you should think of both sides and try to use that uh, or use those ideas to incorporate your preemptions and your preemptive weighing as well through that. Like I said, it gives you a free like pass also to build whatever they should be defending. So it's quite strategic as well that way. Don't look at it as a just a disadvantage.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Yes, Arif.
So this question is regarding tactics of persuasion and examples that you use. I think the thing that I struggle with is how exactly to phrase things to make my case intuitive, how to make the comparison that I'm running intuitive. So I just wanted to know how to develop this. Any drills or anything to do to prep and
How
make
to make
development skill.
things intuitive is yeah. So the thing is, intuition is not is usually locked for people. So you can't make things intuitive. You can't make them feel like, oh, this is something that they should have thought of. But what you can do is you can give them a big brain moment. Like when you run something totally new, then you have to spend a lot of time persuading why there's something that's realistically possible or should realistically be given credit in the debate. And that is something where you have to basically hold the judge's hand and walk them through the entire step of the process, from the frame to the mechanism to the impact to the weighing to the tipping points to everything, to the comparatives to everything. And that requires a lot of burden fulfillment. Yes, you can use examples, and I would say that in order to learn better examples, the only solution I have is to just read up more, watch more YouTube videos, like read the newspaper, and much more. I don't know, like stop doom scrolling. It's yeah. So whatever, like you get the vibe, right? Like to get better at examples and better at using that example at the right time. Your brain, it has to come very naturally. You can't learn an example and then just regurgitate it. You have to, it has to come naturally to you. If it comes naturally to you, only then you can hold the judge's hand and walk them through the entire argument. And perhaps then it becomes somewhat of a big brain moment for them. Because if that doesn't happen, then they'll just like look at your case and feel that like it's a stupid argument that should not be given credit, and they'll disregard you. So those tactics of persuasion, it's an ever learning process, because knowledge is also an ever learning process, and persuasion comes from those things. Especially when we talk about examples, there are other methods of persuasion. Clarity, and I think clarity is exceptionally underrated. I feel it's not just for speaks, and people believe it's just for speaks. It's not. I think more often than not, judges are not always top level. In the Indian circuit, you'll hardly find judges are in the top level when it comes to at least being internationally competitive, whatever. So what this means is that you have to basically come to their level and idiot proof your case more often than not, to ensure that it makes sense to them. And to idiot proof anything, you have to be very clear in how you're idiot proofing anything. Because if you are just running a bunch of complicated mechanisms, and you're running a bunch of finance spec, you're running a bunch of psychological step in spec, and it makes no sense to anyone but you because you're a subject matter expert, then judges is not going to credit it. Like they will make up some random reason to give you a loss, that they'll say, oh, you didn't engage enough, or it's comparative missing, or whatever. But in reality, they have just not understood you enough. And that's why clarity is also important. So it's criminally underrated as a skill, and it's really important to have that clarity, which means you have to go slow in your speech. You can't rush through the speech. You have to emphasize on certain things. You have to pause it out. And sometimes you have to just like be like assertive in certain sentences that you say. Certain examples that you use, you have to make them a bit emotive to actually move the judge. It sounds like drama, it sounds like theater, right? But like it's not dram sock, but it's still somewhat similar to dram sock. So those are elements that you can actually include in terms of the other ways to persuade, if not for examples.
Thank you.
No worries. Yes, Pragun.
Yeah, am I audible first?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
My question is regarding dealing with the back half as opening. I had this question that since as opening you will run the most intuitive ideas and assuming you explain them fully, but you still have the fear that, um, as you said, backup will come with some backass and will because they know the impacts that we have done, so they'll just somehow squirrel through and somehow reach that something is that they say is much more important than we said. Is there any techniques of like in opening saying that uh, that what we have done is something very important or something very big in impact as we tackle the intuitive ideas, and the back half to beat us has to create something even larger? This is an example, but are there any such techniques?
Yeah, I mean, multiple things. You can do multiple things here. The first thing you can do is, like I said, focus on your case, complete the argument enough, wait out from DPM speech itself or DLO speech itself, to ensure that the other side is forced a burden to defend the counter weighing, or your back half has to give stronger weighing on why their case makes more sense than you. So you push the burden on every team if you're top half to do that. That's one. Second is like become like be sneaky, be a little slimy in your POIs that you ask to the other team, or like to your crosses basically. Try to explain why CG's case does not make a lot of sense sometimes. That's like, again, that it's a hit or miss, and it's not a like a skill that I would expect anyone to develop, because it's not really a skill, like it's a fluke. um Third, I would say, is just trust the judge. I know it sounds counterintuitive again to what I just said. You will not find a lot of great judges in the Indian circuit, but I think you will find a lot of at least good judges. Like not great, but like you'll find a lot of good judges who at least know how burdens work. So who at least know how weighing works or how extensions work. So if you feel that your closing is trying to be over smart, and they're doing stuff that you did not expect, then perhaps the judge is also not buying it to the fullest extent. Sometimes they might do, and sometimes you'll be like, you know fuck it, why didn't we think of this? But sometimes they might not. Sometimes the judges might be like, oh, this is just so dumb, I didn't understand it, so perhaps you're losing to your opening. Those things can happen, and that's like a part of debating. Like if you're opening, there's not a lot you can do. It's the card that you're dealt with by the tab. So like I said, it's something that you have to deal with. But yeah, what you can do, what's controllable is in your hand, and that's something you should completely work on, which is your case completion, your being. Everything else is uncontrollable. Those are variables you should not try to control, because the more you try to do that, the more you will lose focus on your own case. If you try to turf burn a lot, you don't complete your argumentation, then you just then perhaps turf burning is not helpful at all, because it'll just run a vertical on you, and the turf burning for the 4 minutes that you try to do in DPM speech is just a waste now. So no point in doing that. So which means that only control the things that you can actually control. And that sounds like good life advice as well, but it also helps in debating.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you. Just one follow-up.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
as we told about the recency bias that comes in closing, and there, if you're able to capitalize on it, it's well and good. But as in opening, is there any like meta technique or some fluke that you say something in opening and it still remains in the head of the judge till the end of the debate, and he still keeps it comparing with the closing, and the recency bias kind of disappears?
Yeah, stock. Intuitive cases are always going to be intuitive. They're called intuitive because the judges resonate with them much more. Everyone, human being resonates with them much more. Stock cases are called intuitive cases because it resonates with everyone much more than say back cases or fancy extensions do. So it means that like even if you don't have the recency bias because you're opening, which is fair, but the problem is that you have said something that is going to be easy to digest for the judge to like it's going to be easier for the judge to digest, even if the debate has panned out a quite different way, because the closing might just run something quite whack. They might have recency bias, but if it's not digestible, if it's not even edible, then what's the point of running that thing? Which means that you should not be worried about this is something that's, like I said, a part of debating. You just ensure that you're going to complete your argument, and usually run the most stock cases. uh, Stock cases really help out a lot because people try to be fancy, and that ends up biting them in the ass, and that's something that's like not recommended, at least not at an intermediate level. So try to complete your stock arguments. Even if you look at great debate speeches, like you check words, you open YouTube, find out great debate speeches, you'll always see that people run stock first. They complete stock, and they have so much nuance in the stock. They have so many different angles or mechanism to the stock, that you'll be surprised that okay, the same idea that I was thinking of and this great person's debating is thinking of, it's the same idea, but the way he's running is completely different. Or the level of the degree of analysis that they're doing is completely different. So those are things you should try to perfect first. That's why I said inch wide, mile deep. Complete your controllable, but don't try to figure out, the recency bias and all those kind of things. Those things do play in, but they're not deal breakers. Um, okay, Tejas, yes,
Yeah, am I audible?
yes.
Yeah, so simple question, and I'll also probably exemplify it. When in a tricky situation, when there are equally plausible interpretations, like possible out of the motion, how do you make sure that the judge sort of weighs your interpretation? Like, for example, when you were debating for ABP semifinals, the motion was something like this: House prefers a world where people would undervalue the feelings of loss as opposed to overvaluing it. Now, the intuitive interpretation of that is the internal feeling of loss that you'll have. But then you, in closing, you went ahead and said something like, value is a social construct. So in both the worlds, people would equally feel loss. And when we're talking about the feelings of undervaluing and overvaluing, we're actually referring to like societal interpretation. So in your world, you'll have better health, mental health support mechanisms and stuff like that. Yeah? So both of these interpretations seem plausible, but then how do you make sure that the judge sort of buys into your interpretation, especially like how you did in semifinals, like ABP?
That's a pretty good question, because that frame was something that we didn't think of in prep time at all. That frame actually was developed as a consequence of top half clash. So the top half clash talked about how the loss feels bad to people on either side. So if the loss felt bad to either side, and top half teams that have not resolved it up until this point, up until closing, that is where we used this sort of clash, or this lack of resolution of this clash on what really changes as a consequence. Because you're going to feel the loss on both sides, so it doesn't really change you, right? You're still going to cry, because both teams are on top are trying to claim that you will cry, you will learn, you will regret, you will learn again, whatever they're trying to do. Which means it's a good clash, and they have done enough analysis on this, but they're not resolving it. They're not explaining who's winning. So at the end of DLO, I was quite uncertain of who's winning. That DLO speech is quite good. I thought like it's a toss up between OG and OO. Yes, OG did win the room eventually, if you think about it. But when you're in the debate, in the heat of the moment, it doesn't come to us as clearly, because you're obviously on one side, so you're biased towards that side. So I thought that DLO was quite good, and they were winning on top half because they just did more analysis. But that was not a very concrete way of judging that debate, because there's more analysis doesn't mean that analysis is more persuasive or much or makes more sense. That means that at least till after DLO, it just felt that it's a toss up between the two to a certain degree. And that's where we thought that perhaps the only way to enter this is to explain why the loss is going to be there on both sides, because both teams agree with this, and reduce a completely new angle. But the the way we did this, and like the thought here was just to explain that uh, the loss is valued by other people and not by you. And I think we gave a bunch of reasons for this, and the biggest reason we gave for this was that both top half teams agree that people will suffer on both sides, people will cry on both sides. So we're trying to weaponize the lack of resolution in top half, use it as a reason for why our frame is more important than their frame. Because if they were able to resolve this clash in top half, then their frame would have made sense. So what we're doing is we are reverse engineering the argument in a way where we are saying that because the clash is not resolved, which means the frame is wrong. Because if you change the frame, suddenly the clash becomes much more realistic. Because now you can just explain that it's not how you perceive the loss, it's how others perceive you. Because if you're crying on both sides, perhaps it's not about your expression, or this debate is not about or the change in this debate, or the delta on either side, or whatever like debate fancy term you want to call it, the comparative on this debate is not going to change with what you feel anymore, because you're crying on both sides. So the deadlock in top half is what we weaponize to explain why a frame matters more than the other side's frame or the top half's frame. That was the way we did it.
Right. Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So if I give, let's say, if the top half gave concrete reasons to believe that the motion was more about, let's say, the internal feeling of loss and not about how the society
Pardon,
values it,
pardon,
it's just
you're breaking.
strategy.
You're breaking a bit. Sorry.
About right
Um.
How about right now?
Yeah, yeah,
Am
it's
I
better.
still breaking?
Yeah, it's better. Better.
Right. So let's say if the top half gave concrete reasons to believe that the motion was more about the internal feeling of loss,
Ah,
let's
it's
say
breaking
for the
again.
society to value loss,
Sorry, it's
as
breaking
flow of
again.
inner feelings, right?
Tejas, it's breaking again. Perhaps you can like type it out on the chat and
But
an answer. You're breaking again for me. Sorry. I'm gonna circle back to you, Rishita.
Hi, my question is when your closing has a extension on the same metric you're trying to win, in the sense of if I as OG run a case about vulnerability and I try to cover the most amount of people in the sense of like scale, and these are people are affected economically, politically, and CG comes up and says ki this is why vulnerability exists and this is why people are vulnerable and hence this is why people are impacted. Is that credited as a full extension? Because I believe the
Yes.
end impact we are trying to drive is
Yes,
same.
but they are giving characterization that you have not given. So this is like a framing burden that you have missed out then. Because what you're doing is you're impacting and then weighing out why your stakeholder, why vulnerability matters more as stakeholder. What they are saying is why vulnerability is there in the first place. So what they're doing is they're doing a logically upstream burden of you. So yes, it can be read as as a characterization extension basically, and they can win over you. That is quite plausible. Again, depends on the round. I like sometimes it works. Like more often than not, I would credit it if this was as clean as the question is. But if it's somewhere in the gray area, then obviously again these things can change as the debate pans out. Okay, Aditi.
Yes, I have two questions. First one is this is a vague question, but I have to ask because it's been affecting my speaker scores a lot, which is whenever you go like closing and usually whip, it is very easy for like when you're not getting a first and a second, you're on the lower bracket. It's easier for judges to dismiss your scores and just give lesser scores to whips. So, yeah, are there any ways in which I can particularly increase my speaks?
Uh, like yeah, you identified quite correct. It's quite a vague question. I don't have a clear answer for this. Like I said, clarity helps a lot. The examples that you use help a lot. Completion of arguments, fulfilling of basic speaker role burdens really helps a lot. Being confused in your speech does not help. Attempt at engagement does help a lot. Great engagement obviously helps greatly, but at least attempting engagement is like the first step to that. So obviously attempt engagement. Don't just leave it to the gods that they will somehow beat the other team. That doesn't really happen. You have to do it yourself. So this is a question not just for whip speeches in BPs. This is a question for just speaking in general. um these are stuff like basic hygiene rules that you have to fulfill. If you are able to do this, then no judge will realistically tank your speaks. If it's a bad quality debate, and everyone's given a bad quality speech, then obviously you will end up scoring on the lower end, right? Because you're third and fourth. Like that's the basis of a question. But if it's like a good quality debate, only then you end up getting good speaker scores. So if you notice, like even top debaters in round one and two, they usually don't end up scoring very highly. They end up scoring very highly in round three, four, five onwards when they start facing good teams. So when they face good teams, they are forced to make those sophisticated arguments, and those, like, that those tricks of persuasion really kick in here. And when that happens, your speaker scores just keep on increasing. First round usually is like a 78 to 80 even for me at this stage, which means that it's not just on you, it's also depend on the round a lot. Judges are also not really willing to give like a high speaker score in round one. They usually end up giving high speaker scores as in when you progress into debate. In the beginning, they are also a bit conservative because everyone's just starting out. So there is no clear, like I say, the answer to your question on how to improve speaker scores. Those are things that just take time. Um, Practice more, fix your structure, fix your basic the basic stuff that you do, follow the best practices of fulfilling burdens, completing arguments, attempting engagement, giving good examples, pausing, using right tonality, using right pace, don't sound confused, have confidence in your case, psychologically control the room in a way. Those kind of things really help. Like, sometimes it's just about collecting aura points as well. It's weird coming from a millennial, but yeah. But like sometimes it also really helps. Like your confidence does rub off on judges sometimes, and this that also helps them perhaps give you 1 or 2 points extra. um, maybe not. This is, like I said, quite an ambiguous question, and the answer is also equally ambiguous. um,
Cool, cool.
yeah, those things.
Second questions would be because this is a big issue in specifically DU circuits that everybody just wants pragmatics, usually. And people usually go for like realism metric, and then you weigh it out, and then you end up winning debates. So, is it a good way while you're weighing on realism and impacting to kind of illustrate that impact if you're not able to sort of give the judge that impact? So if you can't word it out, if is it okay for me to illustrate it through people, through things, through whatever, like because I have seen a lot of people discredit it, I've seen a lot of people suggest it, so it's just a little confusing.
Yeah, very debate dependent question. Don't use examples of your friends that the judges wouldn't know, so that doesn't really help. But like things like, oh, the poor people need food, the minorities need rights, all those kind of things really just sound persuasive intuitively to a judge. So perhaps in those cases, you don't have to explain the extent of the impact. You can go down the road of impacting like stronger. You can say that movements get more funding, movement gets more coalition, there's lesser factionalization within the movement, there's more intersectionality, they get more political critical mass to go out policies into power. Those kind of things are like just additional impacting of just saying the movement is benefited, right? But saying the movement is benefited, you can just restrict it to saying that they are working for the minorities are vulnerable. Obviously you won't say it in this flat tone, you'll add a little bit of emotion to this, and when you do this, you'll just be able to explain why the movement needs to be helped, because it's just an important thing for the vulnerable section of society, without going down the road of the debating sort of debate land impacting, which is like funding and political will and collectivization or whatever. So yes, you can do those rhetoric heavy impacting as well, and you can do this as well. I like to do both, and that is what I would recommend. It's not an either or question, and it should not be an either or question. You should attempt to do both. Like rhetoric cannot be substitute for analysis, but analysis can also not like drive home the point sometimes, which means that you have to rely on rhetoric. So I would say it's more about efficiency in the speaking time, right? If you have 45 seconds of impacting left, you just start with this panel. We do it for the minorities, and then you start giving those debate land impacts as well. It also helps in funding, it also helps in political will, all those. But the first move is panel, we help these minorities. When you do that, perhaps you create that sort of emotive response that you are looking for. So to balance both those things out, it's not an either or question.
Cool, cool. Thank you.
Yes, Shashwat.
I had two questions on engagement through POIs. Number one is that is it good for me to like reveal my cases in POIs or like ask my case relevant POIs? And secondly, if I'm opening and my closing like asks me some stupid POI. So for an example, we did a motion about jury nullification, and my closing my like opposite closing long diagonal asked me a question about like do you hang people for like stealing samosas. So I think that's like a not very constructive POI to ask. So which kind of POI should I ask? Should it be like these stupid kind of POIs or like case relevant POIs?
Okay, so the answer to this question is also not that straightforward. Um, at some point in my debating, in the beginning, I used to ask quite case relevant POIs. Okay, before I answer that question in depth, never, ever, 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 ever give your case extension in your POI. Never do that. Never. I just explained at deputy speech, you have to take the POI and then incorporate in your case. If you do that, you are basically dead. Never give out your case. Ever. Okay, to answer the question a bit more holistically, though, the beginning, like I said, in the starting years of my debating, I used to ask relevant POIs, perhaps like trying to flip a mechanism, perhaps like give like some sort of like, oh, what's the comparative? If this is the comparative, how do you beat it? Or how do you help these people? What's your solution? Whatever. But now I've tried to like start, and I feel also feel the meta has shifted a bit. That sometimes you would try to basically get concessions from the other side. So the POI that you just mentioned about, where you hang people for stealing samosas, in that they're trying to get a concession from you. And I think it's a great thing when you ask someone this and they are just spellbound. They're like, what? And maybe they dismiss it off. But the impact it creates on judges' head is that they don't know the answer to this question sometimes. But if it's asked to you, and the way you answer this question now is you basically explain why stealing samosas is not equivalent to murder. It has given you like this question has given you like a platform now. It basically has come in your hands. Like you can actually explain why stealing is not equal to murder. They have given you a great segue in your speech. So don't answer the POI directly. Don't say yes, we'll hang people, or no, we'll not hang people. Say that the stealing is different from murder because of this ABC reasons. That just insanely strengthens your case, and like judges are like, wow, brilliant. Right? Just explain the person they took a burden from the POI, give reasons against the POI, and like that's dead. So the water boundary claims, those kind of concessionary questions that people try to ask you, those questions are a great platform for you to actually rebuild your case or make it much stronger, because sometimes they give you great segue. But more often than not, if you feel that it's a stupid POI, just say that you should approve it in your speech or something. I just don't like that response personally. I tend to go for the first as much as possible. But like in the worst case, you can just like rely on this and say that I didn't understand it, or maybe prove it in your speech. But you should always ask a POI, like I said, to actually get a concession out of people. I also sometimes like to ask POIs just to throw the speaker off. If they are making a great case, if they're giving a great line of argumentation, if they're giving you three max or whatever, I'll ask a POI, which is completely ludicrous if you think about in that context. Perhaps it makes some sense. Perhaps I just do it for the humor sometimes. But it's also equally, I think, fine to ask a POI to throw the speaker off. Like you don't want them to get like a great speech going, right? If they are giving like an 82, you want it to drop to an like an 81 just because they spent like 3 minutes trying to explain why your POI doesn't make any sense, or like even if not 3 minutes, at least 1 minute they explain why your POI doesn't make any sense. Sometimes it's okay to throw people off as well. So POIs are not just to ask questions, also a bit like a psychological dart trick. So those kind of things you have to keep in mind.
Um, One follow up question,
Mhm.
if I may. Um, so we've been me and my debating partner, we've been trying this strategy for one or two debates, especially when we are OG. Is that we ask a POI to CO in an attempt to like way off CG or CO. Like we our POI is just uh, hey, no other team except OG gives you a positive comparative. Please engage. So, like,
Mhm.
is that a good thing to do, or like, does that just piss judges
It's
off?
it's 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 a fluke. It pisses the judges off sometimes, yes. Sometimes it's humorous also. Sometimes they're like, matlab, like as a speaker, if someone says that, if I am up whip and OG says that CG loses to us, I'll be like, yeah, deal with it with CG, man. I don't know. Like I'm beating both of you. So it can take any like shape or form. That POI or that tactic is not a tactic, it's a fluke. It's a shot in the dark. It might work, might not work. More often than not, it does not work. I would not recommend it highly. I would recommend asking a POI. If you have to waste a POI, at least stay on Clash. Do even if you do water boundary, it's fine. Water boundary is completely okay sometimes, just to like be a little intuitive or whatever. But if you ask a PO on Clash and then you don't say no team gives comparative besides OG. Say the comparative we said was this. This is what you are saying. Explain to us why this stakeholder matters more than our stakeholder, which you already explained is more vulnerable and more on scale. Now that POI is a loaded POI. I have to answer that question not just to explain why the comparative makes more sense, but also why the stakeholder is like has a different weighing or why their weighing beats your weighing. So that's a loaded POI. Force them into answering something that is stronger as opposed to trying to beat CG. If you think CG is ludicrous and they don't have a comparative anyway, then your judges will track that. And you should trust the judges a bit on this. Unless until it's quite difficult and it's quite close and it's like very messy, in which case you really can't really help it. It just happens, and it just then it just become like depends on the judges and how the debate has panned out.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, before I get to the next person, I'll just answer this couple of questions on chat. If they gave concrete reasons to believe that the motion was about internal feelings like for the society. God, this is so confusing. Um, yes, I would have changed my strategy, Tejas. I would have actually explained the opposite of this. I would have said that social norms eventually become individual feelings because that's just much more intuitive to buy if you think about it. Because social norms determine your moral compass and also how you are supposed to feel about certain things. So in some societies, something is normalized, perhaps in other societies it's not, which means that your feeling towards that thing is determined by the condition that you are living in. So yes, you could do the precursor to this, but that's quite difficult as a debater or as a judge to really conceptualize that whether individual norms came first or societal expectations came first, because it's a chicken and egg problem at that point. But it's just assumed that society as a whole is a collective and they decide collectively that this something is wrong or good. It can be like a micro society within the larger society framework, that's different. But like a group of people decide this is good and this is bad, and then people within that group who are born within that group or who are growing up within that group tend to internalize those feelings. So that is just much more intuitive to buy. I would have changed my strategy just by explaining the reverse or flip of this frame itself. But if they do like much more nuanced work on that, then obviously the case could have been just completely different. I would have still run the case on explaining why what was that, community is a more important bit. I would not even change my frame. I would just say the community is something that you will approach much more if you tend to overvalue or undervalue your loss. They might not help you out in that moment. Maybe that mechanism falls because the frame is not true now anymore, but the mechanism of approaching the community will still stand. So perhaps our case is still much more I don't know, like intuitive or easy to digest in the complicated mechanisms that came top of. So yeah, perhaps you would change strategy. Like that's an like a like multiverse question. I don't know what would have happened then. Okay, next question is sorry, someone was saying something.
No, I was just saying that at that point it becomes anybody's ball game because it
Yeah,
becomes
yeah,
a chicken and egg problem. Yeah.
yeah.
So it depends
It's
on
like
how the
it's a
judges buy
classic
into it.
chicken neck problem. I don't know what came
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any way you could explain how to prove tipping points? Um, Not really. I think this will depend on an argument. Like every argument has different ways to prove tipping points. You just have to explain the. I'll just explain the theory behind this, like in 5 seconds. That the mechanisms have to be commensurate to the impact that you're trying to claim. What this means is that you can't say that if religions become more liberal, then the world will change. No, only some people will find more catharsis in religion. Two impacts, two different impacts, but what is more realistic or commensurate to the mechanism at hand, those are things that drive realism in debating. So realism can be an easy way for you to prove tipping points. Second would be just to give examples, use precedent, say that this has happened in the past, so perhaps this will happen in the future. Similar lines of analysis or similar, use copy paste in that way. But very argument dependent. Some arguments have a lot high burdens to prove tipping points, some them do not. So some are too intuitive, so you don't need to prove tipping points. Saying that religions like run charities, I don't have to prove the tipping point for this or why they run charities. I can say that they want to convert more people, but even if I don't, everyone will agree with me because it's just intuitive and everyone knows, everyone's an OIV in a way. So it really depends on argumentation to argumentation. There's no one straight line for me to say that this is the exact way to do it. Examples are great, the precedent is great, realism really helps a lot, but that's mostly it, at least for basic stuff. Yes, Rushal, go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is, when it comes to motions with larger scopes, where as okay, so my question is specifically for DPM, right? So when you can't matter burn, or where you can't like cover a lot of arguments that could be made throughout the debate, as a DPM, should you try to like focus on 2 3 points that your PM made and just make those concrete arguments, or should you preemptively try to rebut cases like other teams' potential cases? Like, what would you give a priority? And just as an add-on to this, I want to narrow this to THP as well, where should you spend more time defending your status quo or your model, or should you spend more time breaking the other teams down?
Um, See, breaking other teams down, preempting other teams beats them. It doesn't make you win. I said this in the like workshop as well. Winning is different from beating other people. Those are not the same thing. If you take heavy blows to yourself, even if you're beating the other team, that really does not help you. I mean, this year's DNLU finals was something like that. Like the frame at LO was so strong that it completely beat out OG, but also completely beat out opening opposition itself, right? So that just makes back half so much easy to do. And perhaps beating other team is not something that should give priority to. If this question is a black and white question, then I would say you should always prioritize building your case. But it will never be black and white. It'll always be gray. But if you want to if you want to answer the question, it's just like focus on your case first, man. Like complete that case, complete those arguments, like run that inch wide mile deep mentality, do a all impacting wing and everything, and then if you have time, engage surely. um, don't just waste time engaging if you don't have a case. It really does not help, um, because you might beat out the other team but you are not winning on anything, so there's nothing that the judge can give to your credit besides you pushing a bunch of burdens on the other team.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. I see no more raised hands. If anyone has questions, please feel free. I will stay here for 3 more minutes. It's been 2 hours almost on this call now. Yes, register for SMVIT PD. We have a great adjudication core. Uh, SMVs, this OC is quite great, so register. Right. I'm assuming there are no more questions. Thank you so much. Good luck debating at SMVIT or otherwise. Yep, cheers.